Riftwalkers Radio is waiting for you.
Just step through the rift
and discover a world of fantasy like you've never heard before.
All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a topic that might surprise a few folks out there.
Definitely going to be a lot less Tinkerbell and a lot more, well, kind of scary, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about fairies, but not the, cute, sparkly ones you see in children's books.
Not the Disney version.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going deep into the dark side of these creatures and why they have, inspired so much fear throughout history.
Fear and fascination.
Fascination, that's right.
They're very interesting.
Our source material today is a YouTube video from Pantheon Mythology called Why Are Fairies So Sinister?
Great video. Really dives into the history of how we think about these creatures and how they've evolved over time.
Yeah. I think people are going to be really surprised to learn just how different, the modern fairy is from the beings that we see in folklore.
Absolutely.
So to get started, I'm kind of curious, where does the word fairy even come from?
Right. It sounds so light and airy.
It does.
Which
it's deceptive.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't sound very sinister, does it?
No, not at all. But the word itself actually has roots in Latin and Old French.
Okay.
And those original meanings were tied to ideas of fate, enchantment, and magic.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's this suggestion right from the very beginning that fairies were associated with forces beyond human control.
Right from the start.
Yeah.
Powerful beings.
Yeah, messing with destiny.
Messing with destiny. Oh, boy.
It's not Tinkerbell.
There's not Tinkerbell, no.
No.
And the video really emphasizes how connected these fairies were to nature.
Absolutely.
Almost like they embody the wildness of the world.
Yeah, they were seen as nature spirits.
Okay.
Intimately tied to the landscape. Trees, rivers, mountains.
It's almost like they were guardians of the natural world.
Right.
But guardians can be fierce.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you think about how...
for much of human history, nature was both revered and feared.
Oh, absolutely.
You relied on it for survival.
Right.
But it could also turn on you in an instant.
Yeah.
And fairies embody that duality.
Interesting.
The beauty and the danger of the natural world.
It's looking into a mirror, right?
Yeah.
But the reflection is distorted and showing us that darker side.
Yeah. Maybe what we fear about fairies is actually what we fear about the power of nature itself.
Wow, now that's a thought-provoking idea.
It is.
But speaking of the dark side...
Yes.
We have to talk about changelings, because that's where the fairy tales take a really chilling turn.
This is one of the most unsettling motifs in folklore, I think.
Yeah.
Especially in those Celtic traditions.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that fairies would snatch human babies and leave behind their own offspring.
These changelings.
Still. Yeah, it's the stuff of nightmares.
It makes you think, what anxieties fueled those beliefs.
Right. What were they afraid of?
Because, to think of a family believing that their child had been stolen and replaced by a creature from another realm, it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, but it was a widespread belief.
It really was.
And there were all these specific symptoms attributed to changelings.
Yeah, the video talks about how they were said to be sickly, constantly crying, and even strangely intelligent for their age.
Unsettling intelligence.
It's unsettling.
Yeah, it is.
It makes you wonder, were these just ways of explaining childhood illnesses or developmental differences that people didn't understand at the time?
It's possible that's one interpretation.
Yeah.
But I think it goes a bit deeper than that.
Okay.
You have to remember, infant mortality was incredibly high back then.
Of course.
Imagine the grief and desperation parents must have felt grasping for any explanation, any way to make sense of such a devastating loss.
Right. So maybe the idea of changelings provided a sort of twisted comfort.
It's possible, isn't it?
It was somehow easier to believe that their child had been taken than to just face the brutal reality of death.
I think so.
Yeah.
And the fact that these beliefs persisted for centuries suggests that they tapped into some deep-seated fears.
Yeah.
Anxieties about the vulnerability of children and the unseen forces that could disrupt family life.
Right. And these unseen forces weren't always content with just abducting babies.
No.
The video talks about how fairies were known for their capacity for curses and spite. You practically had to walk on eggshells around them.
You really did. Any little thing could set them off.
So kind of curses are we talking about here?
Oh, well.
Like, was it bad hair days and stubbed toes, or?
No, no, no. It was way worse than that.
Okay.
We're talking incurable illnesses,
yeah,
freak accidents, and relentless misfortune that could haunt you for a lifetime.
Oh, wow.
Even impact future generations.
So if you thought you'd been cursed by a fairy, was there anything you could do about it?
Well, some people would turn to those believed to have a connection to the fairy realm. Folk healers? What they called fairy doctors.
Like a shaman?
Kind of, yeah.
Okay.
These individuals would try to appease the offended fairies or lift the curse through rituals and offerings.
But there was no guarantee it would work right.
No, not at all.
So you might spend your whole life wondering if that spilled milk
Right.
or that broken mirror had earned you a fairy curse.
Exactly. That uncertainty, that sense of walking a tightrope between the human world and the fairy realm
Yeah.
is key to understanding why these beliefs held such power over people.
It's like living with this invisible threat hanging over you.
Mm-hmm.
You never know when a fairy might decide to take offense, and the consequences could be dire.
Yeah, and it makes those stories about fairies misleading travelers all the more terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. Like, imagine being lost in the woods, convinced that every rustle of leaves and every twisted path is the work of mischievous fairies.
Leading you deeper and deeper into danger.
Yeah, playing on those very real fears of getting lost. But with this added layer of supernatural dread.
Exactly, and the video gives some great examples of this.
Yeah, like the idea of being pixie-led in English folklore.
Or the stray sod in Irish tale.
It's like the landscape itself becomes enchanted and turns against you.
It does. It's very unsettling.
And it's not just individuals who had to worry about fairy wrath.
Right.
The video also talks about how upsetting fairies could lead to agricultural disasters. We're talking crop failures, livestock diseases.
Right.
Basically anything that threatened the community's livelihood.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't just about personal misfortune. An entire village could suffer.
Right.
Because someone accidentally offended a fairy.
Yeah, did they spill some milk? Who knows?
Right.
Right?
Did specific types of fairies get blamed for these kinds of calamities?
Oh, yeah. Different regions had their own unique boogeymen, so to speak.
Yeah.
In Scotland, for example, the Nuckalavee, this monstrous sea fairy was blamed for droughts and epidemics that devastated livestock.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And then you have creatures like the Spriggans in Cornwall.
Oh, yeah, the Spriggans.
These grotesque guardians of ancient ruins and treasures. And if you disturb their domain, they'd supposedly take it out on your farm.
That's right.
Which is interesting because it suggests that these beliefs were very much tied to specific landscapes.
They were.
And the ways people interacted with them.
Yeah, it wasn't just about abstract fairy magic.
Okay.
It was about understanding the power dynamics of the natural world and the consequences of disrupting that delicate balance.
And as if all of that wasn't enough.
Right. There's more.
There's a whole other level of fairy nastiness.
Yeah.
The Unseelie Court.
The Unseelie Court.
It's like the dark underbelly of the fairy realm where all the most hostile and malevolent creatures hang out.
Right. If the Seelie Court is occasionally benevolent, the Unseelie Court is just straight up bad news.
The video provides a whole roster of these terrifying figures.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about redcaps who soak their hats in the blood of their victims.
Gruesome.
And the Nuckalavee, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
This skeletal, horse-like creature that brought pestilence and disease.
Wherever it went.
Don't forget the Slua.
Oh, yeah, the Slua.
This spectral horde of the unforgiven dead.
Yeah, flying around at night searching for souls to carry off.
That's terrifying.
It is.
And we're just scratching the surface here. There's the Fachan, the Banshee, the Puka, the Gonsianet.
So many.
It makes you wonder, what purpose did these stories serve?
Right.
Were they just meant to scare people into behaving themselves?
I mean, there's definitely a cautionary element to them.
Okay.
But I think it goes deeper than that. These creatures, especially those of the Unseelie Court, represent the very essence of what people feared about fairies.
Okay.
Their unpredictability, their potential for violence, their complete disregard for human suffering.
So they embody the dark side of nature.
Yes.
The forces beyond our control that can strike without warning and leave devastation in their wake.
That's exactly it.
It's like they're a reflection of our deepest fears about the world, but magnified and personified in these monstrous forms.
Yeah, and those fears didn't just manifest in stories about curses and abductions.
Right.
There were also specific fairy traps to watch out for.
Like those seemingly innocent fairy rings?
Yes.
You mean those circles of mushrooms you sometimes see in the woods?
That's the one.
I always thought those were supposed to be lucky.
Oh, no, no, no. In folklore, stepping into a fairy ring was considered incredibly dangerous.
Really?
Oh yeah, you could be transported to the fairy realm.
Like another dimension.
Or trapped in an endless dance. Or even experience a distortion of time.
So it's like stumbling into a portal to another dimension, but with potentially terrifying consequences.
Exactly. It's a gamble.
And it wasn't just about physical traps either.
No.
Fairies were also known for their deceptive gifts and tempting deals.
Oh yes, always a catch.
Like that classic tale of the purse that never empties but brings misery to its owner.
Right. Or the offer of fairy help that turns out to be a binding contract with a terrible price to pay.
So it's like the ultimate cautionary tale.
It is.
Be careful what you wish for. Especially when dealing with fairies.
Especially when dealing with fairies.
And if you ever find yourself face to face with a fairy, there's one thing you should always have on hand.
What's that?
Iron.
Ah, yes, iron.
The video mentions how it was believed to repel or even harm fairies.
It was powerful stuff.
People would hang horseshoes above their doors or carry iron objects for protection.
For protection, yeah.
But why iron, of all things?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Iron, a product of human industry, was seen as this potent force against creatures who embodied the wildness of nature.
So it's almost like a symbolic clash between two worlds.
It is.
The world of human civilization and the world of fairy magic.
Exactly. And iron represents that human encroachment on the natural realm, the clearing of forests, the building of cities, the imposition of human order on the wild.
And perhaps that's why it was seen as so effective against fairies. It was a way of asserting dominance, of saying, this is our territory now.
This is our territory now. But at the same time, it highlights the fear and respect that people still had for those ancient powers.
Right.
They knew that even as they tried to tame the wilderness, they were still vulnerable to the wrath of its guardians.
It's like this ongoing power struggle.
It is.
Between humanity and the forces of nature.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about how our perception of fairies has changed over time. I mean, these days, they're mostly seen as harmless,
right?
Even cute creatures.
Yeah.
What happened to all that fear and dread?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll be exploring in more depth in the next part of our deep dive.
Because the evolution of how we view fairies is really a reflection of how our relationship with the natural world has changed over time.
Exactly.
So stay tuned, because in the next part, we'll be tracing that evolution from those fearsome fairies of folklore to the whimsical creatures of modern fantasy.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. It's going to be an interesting discussion.
It is.
I think.
Yeah.
I think we're going to uncover some really surprising insights.
I think so too.
About how these beliefs have shaped our culture. And how they continue to resonate with us today.
Absolutely.
So last time we were talking about how people used iron to protect themselves from fairies.
Right, that cold, hard metal.
Yeah, it's such a powerful image, you know?
It is.
This product of human innovation being used as a shield against the magic of the wild.
It really speaks to that, shifting balance of power as humans started to assert their dominance over the natural world.
Yeah, like imagine, clearing a forest with iron tools, building a settlement, essentially claiming a piece of land that was once considered the domain of fairies.
Yeah, you can practically hear the fairies whispering like, how dare they?
Right.
Intruding on our domain with their cold, hard metal.
It's like those actions were a direct challenge to the fairy realm.
Absolutely. And, it's not hard to imagine why those ancient beliefs about fairies would have intensified during periods of significant change.
Okay.
Like the rise of agriculture or the Industrial Revolution, as human societies transform.
Right.
So too does their relationship with the natural world.
Yeah. And those anxieties find an outlet in stories about fairies.
Exactly.
It makes you think about how folklore evolves alongside society.
Right.
It does. I mean, today we might not worry about offending a fairy by cutting down a tree, but we have our own anxieties about the environment and the impact of human activity.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see how those ancient anxieties about disrespecting nature, about disrupting the balance of the natural world, still resonate with us today.
Yeah, and speaking of anxieties, the video mentions that fairies weren't always depicted as these uniformly malicious beings.
Right.
There's a kind of moral ambiguity to them, a sense that they operate by their own rules.
Absolutely.
Which don't always align with human morality.
That's one of the things that makes them so fascinating and so terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
They could be benevolent one moment, offering blessings or rewards for kindness or respect, and then turn vengeful the next, unleashing curses for seemingly minor offenses.
So it's like they're a force of nature themselves, unpredictable.
Exactly.
Capricious, capable of both creation and destruction.
Absolutely.
And that unpredictability would have kept people on edge, right?
Oh, absolutely. You can't reason with a hurricane.
Right.
You can't negotiate with an earthquake.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's how people viewed fairies.
So it wasn't enough to simply be a good person. You had to understand the rules of the fairy realm.
Yes, but those rules are constantly shifting.
Talk about pressure.
It must have been immense, that sense of living in a world where unseen forces could disrupt your life at any moment.
Right. It's no wonder that people developed elaborate rituals and superstitions to try to appease fairies or ward off their wrath.
Yeah, trying to maintain that delicate balance between the human world and the fairy realm.
Never quite knowing if they were on solid ground.
And that feeling of uncertainty, of living in a world where the familiar could turn strange and dangerous at any moment. That's something that's echoed in so many fairy tales.
Like those stories where people stumble into fairy realms, places where time moves differently and where the laws of nature are distorted.
Like Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, it's like those stories are tapping into our deepest anxieties about the unknown and the things that lie just beyond the veil of our perception.
Those stories remind us that the world is a mysterious place.
Right.
Full of wonder and danger, and that we're not always in control.
It definitely challenges our modern sense of rationality and scientific understanding.
It does.
But there's also something alluring about those stories, something that draws us in.
Of course.
Even if we don't necessarily believe in fairies anymore.
It's the same reason we're drawn to any good story.
Okay.
We crave mystery, we seek to understand the unknown, and we find comfort in the idea that there might be more to the world than meets the eye.
So those ancient beliefs about fairies might have faded, but the stories themselves continue to resonate with us.
They do.
They tap into something deep within the human psyche. Yeah. Something that speaks to our primal fears and our longing for enchantment.
And perhaps they also serve as a reminder that despite all our technological advancements, we're still part of the natural world, subject to its rhythms and its mysteries.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what those fairies might make of our modern world.
What would they think?
What would they think of our sprawling cities, our reliance on technology, our attempts to control and manipulate nature to suit our needs?
I don't know. Maybe they'd see us as a species that's lost its way, disconnected from the magic and wonder of the natural world.
Or maybe they'd see us as a species struggling to find a new balance.
Right.
A way to coexist with the forces of nature without trying to dominate them.
That's a good question.
Either way, I think it's safe to say that those ancient beliefs about fairies offer a valuable perspective. A reminder that our relationship with the natural world is complex.
It is.
And multifaceted, and that maybe there's still room for a little bit of magic and mystery in our lives.
A little bit of enchantment.
Even if it doesn't come in the form of mischievous trickster fairies.
That's a great point, and it leads us perfectly into the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Where we'll be exploring how those beliefs about fairies have evolved over time.
Right.
And how they continue to shape our culture and imagination today.
So stay tuned, because we're about to uncover the modern legacy of those mischievous, sometimes menacing, but always captivating creatures of folklore.
The fairies.
The fairies. Well, welcome back to our deep dive into the darker side of fairies.
Part 3.
Part 3, that's right.
The final chapter.
We've come a long way, haven't we?
We have.
Exploring these chilling tales from folklore,
Mm-hmm.
the anxieties they reflected,
Right.
and even pondering how those ancient beliefs might have shaped our modern views of nature.
It's been a journey.
It really has.
Through the dark heart of fairyland.
But now it's time to shift our focus to the present.
Okay.
How have those beliefs evolved?
Right.
What happened to those fearsome fairies who could curse crops and steal children?
Yeah, where did they go?
They seem to have vanished,
Mm-hmm.
replaced by these, much more benign, even whimsical figures we see in modern media.
It's a pretty striking contrast.
It really is. On the one hand, you have those menacing fairies lurking in the shadows, ready to punish you for the slightest misstep.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have Tinkerbell flitting around Neverland, spreading pixie dust and good cheer.
Yeah. What happened?
What caused this dramatic shift in perception?
Well, it's not like there was a single moment when everyone suddenly decided that fairies were actually cute and cuddly.
Right.
It was a gradual process influenced by cultural shifts,
Okay.
scientific advancements, and the evolution of storytelling itself.
So as society modernized and as science offered new explanations for the mysteries of the world, those ancient beliefs about fairies started to lose their grip on the collective imagination.
Exactly. Fairies, once seen as these powerful forces of nature, became relegated to the realm of fantasy and entertainment.
So they became figures of childhood wonder stripped of their power and their potential for harm.
Right. They're not so scary anymore.
But even in their tamer, more domesticated forms, there's still something captivating about fairies, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. They still hold a certain allure.
Yeah.
A sense of mystery and wonder.
Okay.
They remind us that there might be more to the world than meets the eye, even if we don't necessarily believe they're hiding in the shadows waiting to trick us.
And perhaps that's why they continue to pop up in our books, our movies, our art.
Right.
It's like we're still trying to make sense of that ancient fascination to find a place for those creatures of folklore in our modern world.
I think that's a key insight.
Yeah.
We might not fear fairies in the same way that people did centuries ago.
Right.
But we haven't completely forgotten them.
So how would you describe that place?
What do you mean?
Like, what role do fairies play in our modern world?
Well, I think they've become symbols of imagination to work, creativity, and a connection to nature.
Okay.
Even as that connection is often romanticized.
Right.
They represent a yearning for a world that's a little more magical, a little less ordinary.
And maybe that yearning is even more pronounced in a world that's increasingly dominated by technology and rationality. It's like we need those reminders that there's still room for wonder and enchantment,
Right.
even if it's just in our stories and our imaginations.
Precisely. And
Yep.
those stories, even the ones that feature those darker, more menacing fairies,
Yeah.
can still teach us valuable lessons.
What kind of lessons?
Well, they remind us that our relationship with the natural world is complex and requires balance.
Okay.
They caution us against taking nature for granted, against exploiting its resources without considering the consequences.
And they remind us that there are forces at play in the world that we might not fully understand.
Right.
That there's still room for mystery and awe, even in a world that seems increasingly knowable.
Exactly. So the next time you encounter a fairy, whether it's in a movie or even just in your own imagination, take a moment to consider what that fairy represents.
Right.
What does it say about our relationship with nature, about our yearning for magic, about our capacity for both wonder and fear?
It's a reminder that those ancient stories, those beliefs that shape the way people viewed the world for centuries, still have something to teach us today.
They do.
Even those menacing fairies lurking in the shadows have a role to play in our understanding of ourselves
Right.
and our place in the world.
Well said. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive into the darker side of fairies.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
And we hope you've enjoyed exploring these hidden depths with us.
We hope you've learned something.
But remember, the exploration doesn't end here.
No.
There's a whole world of folklore and mythology out there waiting to be discovered.
So keep asking questions. Keep seeking those hidden depths and keep the spirit of curiosity alive.
Then who knows?
Who knows?
Maybe you'll even encounter a fairy or two along the way.